It was the night when a wall that divided a world finally fell. In just a few hours, one of history's most powerful symbols of oppression crumbled. Not by bombs, but by hands. This is the story of how the Berlin Wall came down, and how that night changed the world forever. For nearly 3 decades, a wall of concrete and barbed wire cut through the heart of one city, Berlin. On one side, freedom, opportunity, and the Western world. On the other, surveillance, control, and the shadow of the Soviet Union. The Berlin Wall wasn't just a border. It was a scar across a city, a nation, and an entire ideology. For 28 years, it stood as the Cold War made concrete, separating families, friends, and futures. The story of the Berlin Wall is more than a story about politics. It's a story about fear and about courage, about a system built to keep people in, and the unbreakable human desire to break out. And when it finally came crashing down, the world didn't just witness the end of a wall, it witnessed the rebirth of hope. Chapter 1. The Birth of the Wall, 1961. To understand why the wall fell, we must first understand why it was built. World War II left Germany in ruins. Its cities shattered, its people starving, and its government dismantled. The victors, the Allies, divided what was left into 4 zones: American, British, French, and Soviet. Berlin lay deep inside the Soviet-controlled zone of East Germany, but the city itself was split, a western island surrounded by communist territory. Tensions grew fast. The Western Allies rebuilt their sectors into a democratic, capitalist city, West Berlin. The East, under Soviet control, became part of the new communist state, the German Democratic Republic, or GDR. To the East German government, West Berlin was a problem. It was a window into freedom. And every day, thousands of East Germans could see the life they were denied. Between 1949 and 1961, over 3 million East Germans fled to the West, escaping through Berlin. Doctors, engineers, teachers, some of the best minds of the East were leaving. The East German economy was bleeding talent, and the Soviet Union was losing control. Nikita Khrushchev, the Soviet leader, had enough. He demanded a solution, a way to stop the flow of people escaping to the West. So, in the dead of night, on August 13, 1961, the East German government made its move. Thousands of soldiers and police fanned across the city. Streets were cut, railways stopped, and barbed wire fences went up overnight. Berliners woke to find themselves trapped. Their city, their families, their lives, suddenly divided. Over the next weeks, the barbed wire became concrete. The concrete became a wall. And the wall became the world's most infamous border. It wasn't called the Wall of Shame for nothing. It cut across neighborhoods, cemeteries, even buildings. One half of a street might be in freedom, the other in tyranny. Imagine waking up one morning to find that your brother, your parents, your job, were suddenly on the other side. No warning, no choice, no way back. And so began 28 years of division, a physical line that came to define an era. Chapter 2. Life in a Divided City. The Berlin Wall didn't just divide a city, it divided lives. On one side, West Berlin, neon lights, rock and roll, and Coca-Cola. A small western island pulsing with the energy of freedom, surrounded by communist East Germany. On the other side, East Berlin, the gray face of socialism. Concrete apartment blocks, state propaganda posters, and the ever-watchful eyes of the secret police. The wall didn't just block streets. It cut through cemeteries, rivers, and even buildings. One infamous apartment complex on Bernauer Strasse stood half in East Berlin, half in the West. When the wall went up, people jumped from windows to escape, some successfully, some fatally. By 1962, windows were bricked up, streets sealed, and East Berlin was locked tight. Soldiers stood guard in towers with rifles. Orders clear: shoot to kill anyone who tried to flee. Between 1961 and 1989, at least 140 people were killed trying to cross the Berlin Wall. Many more disappeared, their stories silenced, their names erased by the state. Meanwhile, life in East Berlin became a test of endurance. Food shortages, restricted travel, and constant surveillance were part of everyday existence. The East German secret police, the Stasi, built one of the most pervasive spy networks in history. They listened, watched, and documented everything. Neighbors informed on neighbors. Children were taught to report their parents' suspicious behavior. Trust became a luxury few could afford. The Stasi held millions of files, detailed reports on nearly a third of the entire population. It was a world where even your best friend might be an informant. And yet, despite fear, isolation, and iron control, the human spirit never fully surrendered. Behind closed doors, East Germans found ways to live, to laugh, to dream. They built lives around the wall, but never stopped imagining a world without it. And some refused to wait. Chapter 3: The Struggle for Freedom. From the moment it was built, people tried to escape the wall. Some dug tunnels, some flew over it, some rammed it with cars, and some risked everything. In 1962, a group of West Berlin students began digging what became known as Tunnel 29, an escape route stretching under the wall itself. Over weeks of dangerous labor, they tunneled nearly 150 feet underground. When it opened, 29 people crawled to freedom, one by one in silence, as guards patrolled above their heads. Others took to the sky. In 1979, two East German families stitched together a homemade hot air balloon from bedsheets and nylon, and drifted 8,000 feet above East Germany, landing safely in the West. It sounds like a movie, but it was real, and it worked. Each successful escape became a spark, a story whispered through East Berlin that hope was still alive. But for every successful escape, many ended in tragedy. One of the first victims was 18-year-old Peter Fechter. In August 1962, Peter tried to climb the wall near Checkpoint Charlie. He was shot and left to bleed to death in the so-called death strip, in full view of Western cameras. The image of his body, lying helpless while soldiers watched, became a symbol of the cruelty of division. The world could no longer look away. The Berlin Wall wasn't just a structure, it was a statement. This is what happens when freedom is denied. Over the next 2 decades, the wall became a global metaphor. Presidents, popes, and protesters all pointed to it as the embodiment of the Cold War. John F. Kennedy's famous words, "I am a Berliner," electrified the West and sent a message to the East. Berlin would not be abandoned. But no speech could tear it down. For nearly 3 decades, the wall stood firm, cold, gray, and unyielding, until the cracks, political and literal, began to show. The 1980s brought winds of change, both in Berlin and beyond. Chapter 4: The Winds of Change. By the mid-1980s, the world was shifting. The Cold War, once frozen in ideological ice, was beginning to thaw. In 1985, a new leader rose in the Soviet Union, Mikhail Gorbachev. He wasn't like the hardliners before him. Gorbachev brought with him 2 powerful words that would change the course of history: perestroika, restructuring; glasnost, openness. These reforms aimed to modernize the stagnant Soviet system and loosen the state's iron grip on everyday life. But like a gust of wind entering a sealed room, once openness began, it couldn't be contained. In Poland, the Solidarity movement gained momentum. In Hungary, fences on the Austrian border quietly came down. And in East Germany, whispers of hope turned into chants of defiance. By 1989, the East German people had had enough. For decades of isolation, censorship, and fear were breaking under the weight of change. Every Monday night, in the city of Leipzig, citizens gathered to pray for peace, and then they marched. First dozens, then hundreds, then tens of thousands. Their chant echoed through the streets. "Wir sind das Volk." We are the people. The government tried to crush the movement, but the people stood firm. They carried no weapons, only candles and courage. And something extraordinary happened. The soldiers refused to fire. The spell of fear, the one that had kept East Germany silent for decades, was finally broken. By October 1989, protests erupted across East Germany. In Dresden, Berlin, and beyond, citizens demanded reform, freedom, and the resignation of their leader, Erich Honecker. Honecker was forced to resign. His replacement, Egon Krenz, promised change, but the people didn't believe him anymore. Meanwhile, East Germans began escaping en masse through Hungary and Czechoslovakia, where borders were loosening. In a single weekend, more than 30,000 East Germans fled to the west. The East German government was losing control. The pressure was unbearable, and something had to give. Chapter 5. The Night the Wall Fell. November 9, 1989. A date that would echo through history. That evening, the East German government held a routine press conference. The speaker was Günter Schabowski, a party official, flustered and ill-prepared. Reporters asked him about new travel regulations, a minor policy that was meant to gradually allow East Germans to apply for permission to travel abroad. But Schabowski misunderstood his notes. When a journalist asked, "When does this new law take effect?" Schabowski hesitated, glanced at his paper, and said the words that would change history. "So far as I know, effective immediately." Within minutes, the news flashed across television screens. East Germans couldn't believe their ears. Could it be true? Could they finally cross the wall? Crowds began gathering at border checkpoints, confused, nervous, hopeful. By 10:30 p.m., thousands of East Berliners surrounded the Bornholmer Strasse crossing. The guards were overwhelmed. They had no clear orders. One officer, Harold Jaeger, faced an impossible choice: shoot unarmed civilians or open the gate. At 11:30 p.m., he made his decision. He lifted the barrier. And just like that, the wall that had divided Berlin for 28 years was open. Thousands poured through. Families separated for decades embraced. Strangers laughed and wept together under the cold November sky. West Berliners climbed atop the wall, waving flags and handing out champagne. Others picked up hammers and began to chip away at the concrete, piece by piece. They called them Mauerspecht, wall peckers. The air was electric, filled with laughter, tears, and the sound of stone breaking under freedom's rhythm. For the first time in nearly 3 decades, East and West Berlin were one, and the world watched in awe. CNN broadcasted it live. Leaders across the globe celebrated. And in that moment, the Berlin Wall, once a symbol of division, became a monument to human unity. No tanks, no missiles, no bloodshed, just people, ordinary people, who decided they'd had enough of being divided. That night wasn't the end of history, it was the beginning of a new one.